Professor Ed Kottick is one of the most prominent and most enduring characters on the musical scene here in Iowa City and in the Midwest generally. Professor Kottick was on the faculty of the University of Iowa for a great many years. He's a builder of harpsichords, plays the trombone as well. He's very much involved in Renaissance music and in choir direction. So, Professor Kottick, maybe you could start by telling us about the harpsichord. You are a builder of harpsichords, is that correct?
I am a builder of harpsichords, yes.
Okay, so tell us a little about the instrument, the history of the harpsichord, and what goes into building one.
Well, I wrote a book about the history of the harpsichord. It ran about 400 pages. How much would you like?
Well, to begin with, the harpsichord is generally associated with older music. You seldom...
Yeah, well, no, but there is a large body of contemporary music for the harpsichord.
Why do you not hear it that very often?
Well, I hear it. I guess you don't.
Yeah.
How much harpsichord music do you hear? Or
well,
people
generally
generally
speaking, if you're vaguely interested in classical music, then the harpsichord is associated with the Baroque period.
Right.
And perhaps the early classical period, but after that it sort of falls out of favor.
It was sort of out of favor in the 19th century. It was kept alive by very few people, but the piano just swept it under the rug.
And what is it about the harpsichord that makes it particularly distinctive? It's a keyboard instrument, but it's quite different from the piano.
It is. The strings of a harpsichord are plucked.
So it's a string instrument rather than a percussion instrument as the piano is.
It's a string instrument, yeah. In a piano, of course, the strings are struck by hammers. And the difference in sound between a pluck and a strike is really quite different. Historically, the pluck was made by the feather of a crow.
Why a crow in particular?
Made a nice sound.
Okay.
And they were plentiful, certainly in Europe. There's crows.
And when you build a harpsichord these days, do you still use crow feathers?
I don't. Some people still do, but most people use a plastic called Celcon, or either that or Delrin, which these are 20th century plastics that work very well.
All right, and you are best associated, you're most commonly associated with both the harpsichord and the trombone. That's a rather interesting combination of instruments.
It's really not a combination at all.
No, it's not, but did you start with the trombone?
I was a professional trombonist early in life, yes.
And what types of music did you specialize in?
I was a symphony trombonist. I played with the New Orleans Symphony, and I also played in the opera orchestra in New Orleans.
And then how did you come to gain the interest in the harpsichord?
Well, you know, that's as much a mystery to me as it is to you. I've always been interested in the instrument for some reason. And when I had a chance to build a kit, I went ahead and did it and was very happy with the result and sold that instrument. And a couple of years later, built another one. And by this time, I was in Iowa City, and I was about the only one in Iowa City with a harpsichord.
Now, you were not native to Iowa. You were born, I believe, in New Jersey, is that correct?
I was born in New Jersey, yeah, and brought up in Brooklyn, New York.
And how did you happen to get from Brooklyn to New Orleans and then to Iowa City?
Okay, well, when I went to school at NYU, and when I graduated from NYU, I was drafted into the Army. And after that, I auditioned for the New Orleans Symphony, was accepted into the orchestra, and went to New Orleans for 4 years, and did a master's degree also in musicology at Tulane University.
And what is the difference between musicology and a degree in performance?
Musicology deals with the history and science of music, whereas performance deals with execution.
So you got this degree in Louisiana, and then after that you...
Then I went to University of North Carolina and did my doctorate there.
And from there?
From there I went to a number of colleges and universities and ended up in Iowa City with my harpsichord.
That's
and
right.
every once in a while I would get a call from somebody who had called Ebel Music or West Music looking for a harpsichord. And of course, they didn't deal in harpsichords, but they gave them my name. And they'd call me and say, do you know where I can get a harpsichord? And I would answer, yes, you can get one from Germany, and you'll get it fairly soon, but it won't be all that good. Or you can put your name on the list of an American builder, and you'll get a good instrument, but you'll have to wait 10 years.
So it takes you 10 years to build a harpsichord?
No, that was the situation back in, say, 1960, 1970. There was actually a shortage of harpsichord builders. First time in the history of the world. And of course, people weren't interested in waiting 10 years, but they wanted a good instrument. And so they'd say, well, I understand that you have a harpsichord. Yes. Where did you get yours? Well, I built mine. Can you build one for me? And at first I resisted this. I really wasn't interested in doing it. But after a while I started to think about it and said, well, why not? Because I was always doing woodworking, and I had a shop. So I started building them, and my last one was number 53.
And if I was to walk into your studio or wherever you hang out and say, I need a harpsichord, how soon could I expect to get it? And what would I expect to pay?
Oh, I would probably give you a date of maybe a year. And what you would pay depends on what the instrument was. It could be anywhere from $10,000 or $12,000 up to $50,000.
So about the same price range as a car, I would say.
Right.
Maybe a little cheaper.
Yeah.
And within about a year I'd be playing. What is the difference for the musician between playing the piano and playing the harpsichord, or is there not much of a difference?
Well, there is a difference. I mean, the keyboard is very similar looking, but the action feels very different, and one approaches the keyboard in a very different way in the harpsichord. And you can play it like a pianist, and you will sound like a pianist playing the harpsichord, and there really is a difference.
And tell me a little about some of the music that is being produced for the harpsichord these days. Why did it fall out of favor, first of all, in the 19th century, and why is it coming back,
Yeah.
and what sort of music is being composed for it?
Well, the conventional story is that the piano overtook the harpsichord because it could play loud and soft. But that's really not true. The harpsichord could also play loud and soft, particularly ones with two keyboards. And French and English harpsichords had pedals or knee levers that could arrange a whole range of dynamics. So playing loud and soft was not a problem on the 18th century harpsichord. But the piano had a very special kind of sound that the harpsichord couldn't emulate. And that is that as the hammer struck the string, the depth that the string penetrated the hammer produced a different sound. So you could get a whole range of sounds, an infinite range of sounds on a piano, something I call the soul of the piano, that you can't do on the harpsichord.
And I suppose
and this is what the literature at the time was demanding. This is what Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn were demanding, and certainly Schumann and Brahms.
right, so the piano was better able to stand up to the large orchestra that was coming into vogue in the 19th century, correct?
Well, yeah, but certainly not the early piano, not the original piano invented by a builder in Italy called Cristofori.
Well, the early piano, Johann Sebastian Bach took a look at it and said, well, it's very interesting, but it's a toy, it'll never catch on.
Well, he did, but later on, that was a builder named Zilbermann who showed him his piano, and Bach said, well, it's interesting, but the action is very heavy and the treble is weak. And Zilbermann went back and redesigned his instrument, and then came to Bach again and said, now what do you think of it? And Bach really liked it. And in fact, he became an agent for Zilbermann, and he sold a piano to a Polish count.
Okay.
And we still have the receipt.
I'll be darned. That's
So
something
Bach
about,
did play the piano, but it was the early piano. It had nothing at all to do with the modern piano, the modern Steinway.
all right. Now tell us a little about the history of the trombone. That was an instrument that interested me when I was a little boy because I'd never seen anything like it. I can understand the action of a trumpet with the valves and so on, but the slide was something I couldn't figure out. Now, how did the trombone come to be invented, and how has it evolved over the years?
Well, the trombone grew out of the trumpet. The trumpet in the 14th century, one kind of a trumpet was called a slide trumpet. where actually the tube itself could be extended or retracted. So you move the whole instrument. And then somebody got the bright idea of making a crook so that you didn't move the instrument, you just moved the crook. And then you had a trombone.
And what is the trombone's role, generally speaking, in a symphony orchestra?
Good question. Why don't you maybe refine that a little bit? Are we talking about Beethoven or Brahms or Stravinsky?
Let's talk about how the role of the trombone has evolved then, if you like.
Yeah,
it's one of the
okay.
brass instruments,
Yeah.
which means it's in there with the trumpets, the French horns, and so on. And I
Right.
remember the conductor, Sir Thomas Beecham, once said, "Never look at the trombones, it only encourages them."
Right. He's right, too. Actually, it is a brass instrument like a trumpet or a horn, but it was used very differently. It first appears in opera, in 17th century opera, and it's used to portray the supernatural in some way. And it had that connotation all through the 18th century. You're familiar with the opera Don Giovanni, for example, by Mozart. When Don Giovanni speaks the statue of Don Giovanni speaks in the graveyard, he's accompanied by trombones.
I suppose because the trombones sounds vaguely like the wailing of a ghost. Is that the idea?
Well, you said that, not me. I don't know that I would put it that way. And when he's dragged down to hell, you hear the trombones again. The Mozart Requiem uses trombones for that, again, for the supernatural or the religious or whatever. So it's associated with otherworldly things. Beethoven is one of the very first composers to use it in a symphony. He wasn't the first, but he certainly was the first major composer. He used it in his Fifth Symphony.
Okay, and the Fifth Symphony is the one that everybody knows, even if they don't know anything else about Beethoven.
Although the trombones don't appear until the last movement. They sit there for the first three movements.
Right, well, there's that joke that we saw in the Simpsons cartoon show when the house is packed for a performance of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and that four-note motif sounds out da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, and then about 2/3 of the audience gets up and leaves, and somebody says, "What are you all leaving for?" And they said, "Well, we've heard the important part."
Well, no, really, the important part doesn't come until the trombones play, and that's not until the last movement.
Of course, that's what the trombonist would say. And then how has the role of the trombone evolved into, as in the time of Schubert, the time of Bruckner, for example?
Well, Schubert used trombones in a very interesting way. He used them very much like horns, particularly in his Ninth Symphony, the great C major symphony. Brahms used them for reinforcement, used them in a very intense, original way. His trombone parts are wonderful. They're marvelous. They're so exciting to play. Schumann used them to provide power for the orchestra.
That's right, he did.
And all composers have used them for all those reasons ever since.
And Stravinsky used them in a rather distinctive way too, I understand.
Stravinsky liked to use the part of this trombone that goes bam.
And that particular action has given the trombone a reputation as a sort of a comic instrument in some contexts, especially in musical theater and on the vaudeville circuit, somewhat to some extent in jazz.
Yeah, and Ravel was one of the first composers to write that device, which is called a glissando, into an orchestral trombone part, which was in his Bolero.
Oh, of course, and if you heard Bolero, you'll immediately know what you're talking about.
And there was a trombonist in France, a very famous trombonist by the name of Rochu, who refused to play a glissando on the trombone because he thought it really reduced the dignity of the instrument.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, he's true, he's right. But
it's funny how some people will get on the issue of which instruments are dignified and which are not, or whether there is a dignified or an undignified way of playing a certain instrument.
Well, I mean, my approach is that of any other professional I was a professional trombonist, not anymore, but my approach is, give me the music and I'll play it.
And-
whatever you ask me to do, if it's possible to do it, I'll do it.
And your reputation around here is mainly associated with early music, but you've done just about all kinds of music in
I
your
have,
career,
yeah.
right?
I've been, so fortunate to have an interesting and varied musical career. I really am.
So you've done classical music, you've played jazz, I've heard you play in a cabaret setting. When I first became aware of you back when I was an undergraduate in the 1970s, you were very much involved in early music. I believe you were the head of an organization called the Collegium Musicum. Can you tell us a little about that?
The Collegium Musicum was an organization, an ensemble from the School of Music at the University of Iowa that performed Renaissance and medieval music. And I directed that group for, I think, 14 years.
All right, and a lot of our viewers, I believe, have very little acquaintance with medieval and Renaissance music. That's something that you have to study music for a while before you become aware of it. Can you tell us a little about medieval and Renaissance music and how it differs from the classical music or the Baroque period, the classical, the Romantic period?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was not written for the large forces that you find even in Baroque music, say a Baroque orchestra of 15 players or so. You just didn't find that. There's a lot of sacred music, of course, which would be written for small choruses, small choirs. A lot of soloistic music, music written for educated amateurs to sing and amuse themselves. And these were gathered into manuscripts, and fortunately we still have a lot of them, and we're able to reproduce that music in some way.
So musical notation has been around for a long time.
Yeah, since the 10th century.
And polyphony came in a little bit before that, correct? Polyphony
Yeah.
being different voices singing
Yeah,
in harmony rather than in unison.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And that grew out of the church, and just that, polyphony, was considered really revolutionary at one time, correct?
It was. It really was, yeah.
And didn't military music have a great influence on the evolution of music generally? Marches and so on?
Yeah. I'm not sure what you're referring to here unless you mean the Turkish military music, for example.
Well, it would start with, in ancient times, there was just a simple drum to
Oh,
keep
yeah,
people
you
in
mean
step.
drums and trumpets mounted on horses preceding the
Exactly.
king. Yeah, oh, sure. Sure, the more drums and trumpets you had, the more powerful you were.
And then there were, as you mentioned, the Janissary bands that
Yeah.
the Turks had. They would, whenever they conquered a new,
And they were very popular.
they
very
would
popular.
march into whatever town they had conquered with this band, partly to entertain the masses and put them at ease and say, well, they're probably not going to kill us immediately. But it was also a way of showing them, look, guys, we got this big band. We're tough. Don't
Yeah.
mess with us.
Yeah.
And then Renaissance and medieval music, some people would say that it's simpler than, say, Baroque music. Is that true, or?
Not true at all, no. Some Renaissance music is extremely complicated. So complicated that we wonder how it was ever performed. It was really cerebral, some of it, not all of it by any means, but there was this little corner of music that was very difficult rhythmically.
Is that what drew you to early music?
No, I didn't find out
difficulty of
about
it?
that till later. No, what drew me to early music was just the beauty of it. There's just some really lovely music there, and there's some great composers like Josquin de Prez, for example, or Guillaume Dufay, composers that most people maybe never heard of, but wrote some really stunning music.
And I think that's true of just about anybody who is interested in music, that a certain era, a certain period will appeal to you more than others. And some people might be just stone fanatics about the Baroque era, or about the late Romantics, as I am, or in your case, the medieval and Renaissance eras. Now, you are also noted around these parts as a choir director, and you've been involved in various productions of musicals and operas. I remember working with you on a production of Guys and Dolls.
Right.
And then later on, a production of Anything Goes.
Right.
So tell me a little about what goes into directing a choir, especially when you're dealing with volunteers as you are in a community theater setting.
Okay. I think you're referring to what we would call the ensemble,
Right.
rather than the choir. I actually have done some choir direction, but that's certainly not my specialty.
Okay, I was
But yeah,
misusing the term.
working with the ensemble of people generally who are not, well, it's pretty mixed.
Yeah.
Some people have pretty fair voices, others are just dipping their toes in the ensemble water. They like to be part of a theater production, but you know, it's amazing what people can do when you ask them in the right way. I just amazed sometimes at what those ensembles are able to produce.
And what are some of the tricks that you use when you're working with an ensemble that doesn't maybe know too much?
Well, first of all, you have to know what they're capable of doing. There's no point in asking them to do something they can't do and then insisting on it and insisting on it and insisting on it, because that's just going to be frustrating for everybody. So you have to know what their limits are, but then you have to know how to get them up to that stage. And that, I guess, is a matter of experience.
Well, I well recall that when we did that production of Guys and Dolls, I had not had much experience as a singer, and I was told by you in no uncertain terms to not let my voice be too terribly prominent. I remember that very well. How do you manage then to get the best singers to sort of carry the rest of them? Well, first of all, you tell the bad singers as nicely as you can to keep it down, but then...
Well, you know, if they're bad singers, they're not going to be in the ensemble. Anybody who's in the ensemble will at least have the potential of doing what we're going to ask them to do. And if they don't have that potential, then they're not chosen.
Okay.
Or at least that's the way it's supposed to work.
Well, and I will mention that the following year when we did Anything Goes, not only did I sing in the ensemble, but I had a solo, and apparently I didn't disgrace myself.
Oh, you
because
did well.
Didn't say anything
You did
about
well.
it. So that gives me hope anyway. So I understand that later on this year, well, quite a bit later on this year, you're going to be directing a sing-along version of Handel's Messiah.
Right,
That's
yeah.
coming up in December, and we might as well talk about it now.
Sure.
Because no doubt there are going to be singers out there who are going to want to participate in it, and they're going to want to start preparing. So first of all, tell us a little about Messiah, the show, and what it entails and why it has become such an important part of the whole musical picture.
Okay. Well, you know that Handel was German, but he came to England to write Italian operas. So, you know, that's a nice state of affairs. A German-speaking composer goes to an English-speaking composer to write operas in Italian.
Well, in those days, operas were all in either French or in Italian.
Yeah, and the English loved Italian operas. He established an Italian opera company and was very successful. But eventually, Italian opera went out of favor, and Handel turned to writing oratorios in English. And Messiah is without a doubt his most popular oratorio.
Now, as I understand it, the difference between an opera and an oratorio is that an opera has got costumes, it's got sets, it's got motion and so forth, whereas the oratorio is mostly just people singing in an ensemble, or when they have a solo part, just getting up and singing the solo part with very little, if any, costumes or action.
Yeah, it's a sung narrative, in other words, yeah. And there have been staged and costumed performances of oratorios, but generally the the oratorio is a static sort of performance.
And Messiah is arguably the most famous oratorio out there.
It certainly is.
Written in English by Handel. He was commissioned, I believe he was commissioned by King George I. Is that correct?
I don't know. He was commissioned. The first performance was in Dublin.
Oh.
It was written for performance in Dublin. It was very successful, and then it came back to London.
This would be in the year 17.
Don't remember the year, but 17 is a good start.
Uh-huh.
And it was interesting. They performed it in a very large hall, and expected a lot of people. And in the newspaper advertisement, they requested that gentlemen not bring their swords,
Right.
and that women not wear their hoop skirts.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, so that they could squeeze more people in. But yeah, it's been ever since it was first performed. It's been just a favorite of everybody, and there have been performances of Handel's Messiah without end, without stop, from the day it was performed on.
And it's a religious piece. It's about the birth of Christ, correct?
Yeah. Well, it has a religious content. I wouldn't call it a religious piece. That is, it's not a sacred piece. It's not a liturgical piece, but it is about a religious figure.
Okay, it's about the
content is religious, yeah.
The birth of Jesus, and it's performed sometimes at Christmas and sometimes at Easter.
Right.
It's suitable for either.
Right, yeah.
And it's gained popularity, I suppose, because in so many countries all over the world, people want to organize sing-alongs. Is that right?
Yeah, the sing-along is a phenomenon. I don't know where it started, and it's true. You find it all over the world. And it can vary from a sing-along with a piano to the kind of sing-along that we will do in Coralville with a professional orchestra and chorus on stage, and people out in the audience just join along with us.
All right, now it's a big show.
It is a
full
big
length.
show.
It runs about 4 hours full length. You're going to
Full
be cutting
length,
it
yeah.
down to about maybe 2 hours, you think?
About 2 hours, a little longer, yeah.
And how much does a person need to know about Messiah in order to participate in the sing-along?
Actually, you can come and not do anything. So you don't have to know anything about it. Or if you know some of the choruses, you can sing what the choruses that you know. Or if you know the whole thing, or if you know the ones that we're performing, you can sing those. Just bring your score. If you don't have a score, you can buy one at West Music. I don't know what they cost, but that's something like $10 or something very nominal. And
There are a lot of people here in the Iowa City area who would like to get more involved in music, would like to learn more about it, maybe pick up an instrument, maybe learn to sing. Do you have any general advice for people who have always been interested in music but just never took it up? Are there, just locally, are there places you can go to join a group or to learn a certain instrument or a certain technique?
yeah, I think if there's nothing like playing an instrument or singing. And if it's something that you've always wanted to do, it's never too late to start, really. And where you find a teacher, I think you can get online to the website of the School of Music, and somewhere on there you'll find a list of students who are happy to teach you.
Okay. And on that note, I'm afraid we've got to wrap up, but thank you very much, Professor Ed Kottick, for
It has
appearing
been
on
a
the
pleasure, Joseph Dobrian.
show. And thank you all.